Welcome to Fans of the Forge. We are doing our wrap-up for Fortune Fire Season 6, Episode 16, Attila's Sword of Mars. Interesting title.
Very interesting title.
So we'll see where that goes. So we have our contestants. Chris Van Gotham, who was a part-time smith with 7 years experience. We had Randy Cass, who was a part-time smith with 3 years experience, and he was a farrier for 15 years.
Yep.
So he's a bladesmith 3 years, but a farrier, you know,
he knows how to move metal.
He knows how to move some metal. So for Dan Strang was the next one with full-time experience of 4 years, and Grover Clifton part-time for 4 years. And their first round challenge,
Yes.
was to make a fantasy-style blade.
Yes.
Interesting, right there, between 12 to 14 inches and not to exceed 22 inches. And they must combine meteorite with 1095 power to create a canister Damascus
There
billet.
you go.
That is a
That's pretty cool.
badass round one right there.
Yeah.
Not only can you design
Whatever you want.
anything, and like you're probably, if you can make it crazier, better. Like as long as it's functional. And you get to do it with a meteorite.
Meteorite.
So it's already could be something that could be considered a magical style of blade, and then you're putting some freaking meteorite power into that thing. That's dope.
That's pretty cool.
That's really cool. I told Teresa, as we were watching this, I go, I'm going to work up to that one day. Like, that's one of those things I want to be able to do.
You're going to get some meteorite?
Get some meteorite and make, even if it's the one time I ever try it, just to try it once and see if I can do it. I think that would be really cool.
Okay.
Anyway, for Chris, he was going for a weapon that an alien would use that would have a wild curved blade.
Yeah.
And that was with the handle in the back.
The handle was like below it, and it had this like, curve like on top. I don't. Yeah.
It was like a half moon.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a half moon or a crescent or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Shape. It was really cool looking. And he decided to leave his canister on and grind it off later. And so he puts the meteorite into the middle of the can so that he would know where that steel is. And then he gets his weld set and draws 26 inches out due to the size and curve of his weapon. So that was what, like twice as long?
Yeah. It was a lot of metal.
And then he knew that the bend would be a weak point, so he left extra mass at that point. And I think he might have even wrote it on there.
He did,
something that said like break.
on his design break point, like pointed where the curve happens.
Right.
So.
And he knew that bend would be the weak point, so I said that already. Okay. So he quenched with the can still on the ground, on the outside, and forgot about it for like a minute, and then he's like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah, he's like, "Oh yeah, that's right," because he was file checking, and he's like, "Oh, it's not hard." And he's like, "Oh yeah, the can's still on it."
For Randy, he was going for a fish design, so it was an interesting take. Like, but I liked it. I thought it was a cool. He was still doing something creative with it, and it was. I've played video games where you can get a fish sword where you're just you're swinging a fish around and attacking guys. So I liked it. It was cool.
Yeah.
He's not familiar with canister, which we've said it before. Season 6 of the show, canister is often a challenge. If you know you're going to go on the show,
attempt it once.
But he knows to coat the inside of the canister with liquid paper. And then he spends a lot of time getting the can off. And then after the quench, he found a small crack, but was able to grind it away. And his blade shape was not quite how it was supposed to be on paper. It resembles more of a paddle.
Yeah.
And Doug said that's the wrong kind of fantasy. That was a good one.
That's a good one.
That was a good one. Doug nailed it with that. For Dan, he makes fantasy blades regularly.
How about that?
What do you know?
Oh, by the way, Dan is like 19 years old.
Oh, yeah, really young.
Like yeah, really young guy.
His blade is based on a Viking blade, equals Space Viking.
Yeah, so he was calling like a Space Viking.
Oh, for the style, yeah.
Yeah, and he said something else too. I didn't write it down. It was like you're from like Norway or something like that. I don't know. It was some.
Gotcha.
Or Detroit. I don't know. Something weird.
And he puts the meteorite into the bottom so that it'll be on the spine of his knife.
Right.
And then after drawing out the billet, he realized he didn't know where the meteorite was anymore, and he had to ask us to find it. And it was all along the edge.
It was all over the place, but it was on the edge.
Yeah, so I was like, well, shoot.
He couldn't do anything about it.
No, so he just had to go with it.
Yeah.
His blade warped after the quench because of all the different metals and whatnot, and so he says that he'll keep quenching until it's within a range that he's comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think he did like 3 or 4 quenches.
Yeah,
it was
crazy.
A few, yeah.
And then for Grover, he was going for probably, even though it was fantasy, it was still more of a traditional design, but maybe still look pretty beefy, like could be like a video game style weapon or something, which it falls under the parameters. The only smith... Oh, okay, so Grover was the only smith that they showed cleaning off the meteorite before putting it in the can.
Yeah, I don't know if the other ones did, but he's the only one that was shown doing that.
Yeah. And then he can't get the can off once he's done his time in the forge, so he doesn't bother, and it just grinds it off. And he picks up a warp after a really, really hot quench, and quench 2 was more of the same, so he headed to the grinder to just see what he could do to sharpen the blade. For judging, Chris had an amazing blade, but there's a concern at the curve where there's a possible break point. Other than that, it's very nice. For Randy, it's a good pattern, but looks more like a paddle, and more accents can be added if he moves forward. For Dan, he had a really neat pattern and the good shape, but needed to fix his warp. And for Grover, the overall length was exceeded by almost 2 full inches.
He had a good looking knife, but it was just, it was too long.
2 inches is a lot.
Yeah.
So,
and that was mentioned during the forging. Oh boy, it looks like it's too long. And what do you know?
It was too long.
There it is. It's too long.
So Grover
again
did not meet parameters. Got the boot. We move on to round 2.
Round 2. You got to put handles on. I don't think there was any specific parameters.
Not really.
If there were, maybe a pommel. I don't fucking know. Anyhow, so for Chris, he chopped off a section of his handle. And then he bent the handle like tang away, so there's room for the fingers to hold the blade without actually hitting the blade while you're holding it.
Mm-hmm.
He had a 4-piece handle construction going on because of the curve of the tang, and he worked carefully to shape the blade and the handle. It was in tight quarters, so because the blade's there and the handle's here. To get all that rounded off is pretty tough.
Oh yeah.
And he got cut while grinding with a few minutes left. So
it was like 2 minutes left.
He wrapped the Band-Aid on. He still had to like sharpen shit up. For Randy, he uses a torch to heat the tang and straighten it out. It was like a slight bend to that. Then he used a piece of meteorite for the guard, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, that was nice. Nice touch.
He gets all the various points sharp, including the edge and that fish mouth tip. So sharpen that all up. For Dan, he couldn't move the torch cart, so he ended up just dragging that thing across the forge floor, much to the dismay of the judges. That thing is screeching like nails on a chalkboard. He eats up the blade and pushes on it to get it straight. And I'm watching it, and I'm thinking it doesn't break, but I was expecting it to, because
anytime they focus on showing those ones, usually
there was a lot of flex going on. I was like, no way. But he's able to remove most of the warp. And then he used blue kieranite for the handle and brass for the guard and pommel to give everything a nice kind of like outer space, like fantasy look. It's pretty cool.
It was nice looking.
Yeah. Oh, so for testing, strength tests, there's an armor chop 8 times by Ben. So for Dan, the knife held together, but there are 3 major sections of deformation. For Randy, there was a lot of mass, but it held up really well. There was some minor edge damage. He did have a comfortable handle, but it was a little easy to lose control. For Chris, after the 3rd hit, the handle pulled away and couldn't be tested further. So he's got to go home. He said he's going to go home, hug his wife, and kiss the dog, but he has neither one of those. But yeah, I mean, you see there's like a crack in it where the handle like pulled away.
And it pinched down on Ben's hand. Which sucked because I really wanted to.
The thing was sick.
So cool.
Yeah, it was really awesome look, but he had to go. So. That was end of round 2.
And we move on to round 3, Attila's Sword of Mars. Attila the Hun was one of the most feared conquerors in history, wreaking havoc across Europe during the 5th century. Legend says that he was given the sword by herdsmen, fulfilling a prophecy and a direct sign of the war god Mars of his divine rule. So it featured a curved handle with a spear point tip that made for exceptional control, allowing for accurate and brutal thrusts. The blade must have a spear tip and false edge that runs half the length of the spine, and it must also include a ball pommel, drop handle, and finial ball guard. So, for day 1 for Randy, he decided to make Damascus for the blade, but after about 3.5 hours, he sees that one of the welds didn't hold, and he had to scrap it.
Yeah.
So
that was after he cut and stacked it, and then it didn't.
That's the risk
way,
you take.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
For day 2, was not shown, but he got a 13-layer billet stretched out. On day 3, he made his ball guard, but isn't happy with it, so he cuts it apart and fixes it. And then he decides to put some jewels in the handle and does an acid etch on day 4.
Yeah.
So that was looked pretty cool.
His Damascus looked pretty good.
Oh yeah,
it was low layer and it looked pretty nice.
I like low layer Damascus.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just has a cool look to it.
Yeah, you can really see it like from afar. Because like really high layer stuff, you can't even tell it. It looks like it's solid billet, but you could tell it was nice.
And then for Dan, on day 1, he pulled he went and he pulled a leaf spring from a car. Okay. They provide metal. Like, the show provides metal, I'm pretty sure, for all the contestants to be able to make it from. But he chose to use a leaf spring from an old car.
Yeah. He called it a muscle car. I call it a janky car.
Yeah.
It was just sitting outside of his shop, just like chilling.
Yeah. And he works without power hammer or press.
Yeah, he's like, I don't have a... Like, okay, we get it. It's your arm.
For day 2, he quenched and he had a slight warp. So he goes outside and says that he still has a window to fix the warp. So he bends it along his leg and then it proceeds to snap like a twig.
Yeah, like he bent it across his knee. He's like, oh, I'm still in a window. And he goes, bang, crack, snap. I'm like, well... I think that window is gone because, like, you're outside, the camera's outside. Like, I think that window evaporated a while ago.
I don't know how fast it cools down. I mean, like, anytime, like, the time we the time we heat treated our knives, they had to sit for a little while after we put it in the oil, too, just to cool back down. If it was at the point where he was handling it, it probably had cooled down to the point where you shouldn't be doing that anymore.
Yeah,
Anyway, for day 3, they didn't show anything. And on day 4, he cuts up a wooden dolphin and was going to do a burn through, but nothing was smoking when he put the wood over the tang.
Yeah.
And he said that there was no smoke because the tang wasn't hot enough and wasn't touching the wood because the handle wasn't wide enough. So he drills out some of the wood and uses epoxy.
Yeah.
So what is it?
Yeah. So these are my notes. So I say, so what is it? Was the tang not hot enough or was the wood too narrow? If it was too narrow, shouldn't we have seen some smoke? Bullshit. I think there was some odd editing going on that didn't line up to what was happening. So I think maybe there might have been like a couple different events.
Yeah.
Of this burn through attempts, perhaps. I think maybe some attempts going on here. I think, so, I mean, he knows how to do a burn through. Right. I'm pretty sure. Because he was attempting it. He, there has to be a reason he gave up on trying to do a burn through.
Yeah.
And then went to epoxy. But they didn't show him explaining any of that.
No.
So, yeah.
The magic of TV editing.
It's questions all around. So anyhow, moving on to testing.
Yeah.
Kill test. It's an assault on a ballistics dummy. For Randy, gorgeous Damascus and very aggressive design for thrusting and slashing. But the flare on the handle should almost be reversed, and it makes it hard to lock onto and opens up the hand. So he had like this...
It flared up.
It flared up. It got really wide.
Which you never see that.
No.
And it seems counterintuitive, which is kind of what they ended up saying.
Which, happened. Just open up your hand. So, anyhow. For Dan, it was great balance and the handle is curved enough so it allows for a good grip. It was a good edge for deep cuts, but the tip picked up a bend.
Okay.
All right. For the strength test, there was a horse skull chop 7 times by Dave Baker. For Randy, one section has lost its edge, and there's some small rolls, but it's still solid.
Right.
For Dan, it broke after the 5th hit, and it broke right at the guard.
Oof, yeah.
So Dave says, aside from the obvious, there was good design and weight, but there was a lot of space in the handle, so it allowed for some movement and became a weak point. So you can see there's a cavity in the handle.
Right.
Where I guess there was a void, and it just allowed for some movement, and that's what allowed it to fail. So Dan had to leave, and Randy is our champion for this episode.
There you go.
Yeah, so good job, Randy.
Congratulations. Nice. Good job. Yeah, I question maybe Dan's material choice as well. If he chose, because he did go with the leaf spring, that was a little funky. Maybe that could have also played a part. Who knows?
Who knows?
But anyway,
Could have.
Congrats to all the guys. Good job on your episode. Again, congrats to Randy for winning. Thanks everybody who's followed us, especially since Blade Show. We've got a big influx of new Facebook followers.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks. And also Instagram and all that good stuff, and YouTube. Remember to like, subscribe, and do all that other stuff.
Whatever.
It's all fun. Whatever. Yeah. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you in the next wrap-up.
See ya. Chop your can. And then these pictures.
Oh, yeah, you sent me those too.
I didn't realize. I don't know if they're going for this, but each one of them has a knife above their head.
They did that on purpose.
Okay, I wasn't. It's like that's one hell of a thing to do by accident. That's funny.
They were coordinating that because they're all like on each other's head with very sharp objects. All right.